Welcome to Flex That Worx, a podcast for anyone building, managing, or growing a flexible workspace without making things more complicated than they need to be. If you're running a single co-working space, juggling multiple locations, or overseeing a growing network of spaces across towns or cities, this is your space. It's for the operators, the managers, decision makers, the people doing the work to make these places run. This is Flex That Worx, scaling your workspace made simpler and less stressful. See you in the episode. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Flex That Worx. You're joining me, Anne-Marie Graham, CEO of Baseworks, and today we have a very special guest, Ashley Proctor. Hi Ashley, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Excellent, fantastic to have you here. So Ashley is the founder of Creative Blueprint, and she's an exec director of Coworking Canada also, where she spent the past 2 decades helping people design spaces that truly serve their communities. She's also the co-facilitator of the Coworking Idea Project, which is redefining inclusion, diversity, equity and accessibility in our industry. So from launching some of Canada's earliest creative co-working spaces to leading global conversations about the future of work, Ashley has been shaping how communities are connecting, collaborating and thriving. So welcome to Flex That Worx, Ashley. We're so pleased to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we straight away talk about the event that you're just coming off the back of?
Well, it's front of mind for a lot of folks who were with us in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, so perhaps.
Yeah, I think it could make sense. So you were hosting Coworking Canada Unconference.
Yeah, it was our 11th annual edition, so we've been doing this 10 years now, and Toronto was like a massive reunion. We actually went to the same venue that we started in 2015. It's an arts hub, Witchwood Barns, a venue run by a local arts organization. So we like to think about where our conference dollars are going as well when we produce an event. So to be able to support that incredible organization and bring the co-working world to Toronto once again, it was a real treat.
Amazing. Well, I'm just back from GCUC London, which took place a week later, and people were buzzing about Toronto. I had major FOMO hearing about it. I'd seen all the posts on LinkedIn, but then meeting people who'd been in the room as well and hearing how valuable it was to people, I had major FOMO. So next year for sure, Baseworks will be there.
That would be
What
amazing.
did you really learn from this 11th edition? What did you have in mind going into it, and how did it unfold for you?
Yeah, I think Coworking Canada is a little bit different. We call it an unconference for a reason. We co-create the entire agenda with our participants, attendees, and co-working operators from across the country. So Coworking Canada is also a collective or an alliance, as well as an event. So we get a lot of input from co-working operators as we're building it out. And this year, we like to sort of weave a narrative around thriving together and the true co in the co-working, the collaboration and the connection and the communities that we build and that we hold space for. So we drew some connections between the emerging AI collective and why they do the work they do, and really drew those lines back to the core values of the co-working movement and why it is that we gather and hold space for others. Why we might be interested in shaping the future of work for workers and organizations. And we also got to do some reflecting. Tanya Thurman from the Center for Social Innovation in Toronto, myself and Cassim Vergy sat down and talked about what the last 20 years of co-working meant to us. And yeah, I got a lot of feedback. People excited to hear from Tanya on how real the experience was. She shared the ups and downs pretty candidly with the audience. So I think that's something special. The speakers, the audience, the participants, we're all one. We all work together to create this event. And we also take everything we learned from day one into the second day and really break it down together. Like, what did we hear? What's resonating? What didn't fit? What are we questioning still? What else can we bring to the conversation? Maybe who's missing from the conversation? So it's really nice to go through that process with a group of like-minded folks who really care about the communities that they're stewarding.
Fantastic. It's why we were so excited to have you on as well, because we didn't feel like the world necessarily needed another podcast, but we started Flex That Worx because we just wanted the voice of the operator to be, front and center in the industry. And sometimes, obviously, we're in the provider space with Baseworks. And of course, then we're hearing from other providers, but it's important that it's the voice of the actual operators that are always front and center. So we love to just, have a bit of a chinwag and keep things really practical and helpful and share what we're seeing, because it also differs between cities and geographies. And there's so much that people can learn from one another if they get the opportunity to lift the heads, but going to events is time consuming. Getting out in the world is brilliant, but we don't always get to do it. So we saw an opportunity to share some of the conversations that we get the privilege of being part of with our listeners. So it's been going well so far, but that's exactly the kind of direction we hoped to take with the podcast. So it's great to have you on.
Ashley, just a question for, and I feel like I'm cheating here because we weren't actually at the conference, but like for yourself, like what were the key points and the key kind of what were your kind of that quote, that moment, that insight, that up or down as you described? What were the kind of key ones that you took away from it yourself personally?
I think what was really important is that we were pushing the audience to think beyond like traditional conference, first of all, but beyond the topics we typically discuss about operations. So we went all the way down to hacking capitalism and how we might use our real estate as social purpose real estate, talking about community owned land trusts or partnering with those who are working in affordable housing and community infrastructure and community-led economic development initiatives. So we really branched out from the traditional, day-to-day operations, although we covered all of that as well. I think we really were asking people to think, what can we do with this incredible network of organizations and spaces that we've built with this 20-year deep co-working movement of people who are so passionate about the work that they do in community? What can we do beyond just operating fantastic spaces? I mean, that's obviously a big deal for a lot of us. It takes up a lot of time and it is most of our full-time jobs. But we can layer our social impact in everything we do. And so that's really what we were questioning throughout. Um, and I think a lot of that came back to building at the speed of trust. We come back to this year after year, and also thinking about the human edge in a more and more AI-driven society, or a more technological society. The advantage that we have in really bringing people together for those moments of human connection and realness in their day is something very special and becoming more and more unique and special.
Absolutely. So many directions I can go with this.
I feel that's what happens with the conference every year.
Totally.
We really
It's
just
full of
plant seeds.
questions.
Yeah.
For you, what did it take a surprising direction at any point? Because I guess you are probably most likely, I'm guessing, always future thinking and you're crafting these agendas, you're creating these sessions. So were you surprised by the direction that the discussions took?
I don't think I was surprised by the direction. I was really hoping that the seeds we were planting on day one would lead to the kinds of discussions that we had on the second day. And then also the kinds of questions that people were asking on the tours on the third day. We wove our way through the city and we looked at creative spaces that have been there 30, 40 years, artists co-working and collaborating together, shared studio and production space. We went to well-certified buildings looking at eco-friendly and how to make our workplaces more healthier for folks. We were asking questions about acoustic and design and furniture and expansion in showrooms. And we were also looking at an outdoor market for entrepreneurs and artists that was built out of shipping containers. So some really fantastic models of like, what does it mean to co-work and what does it mean to build a healthy workspace for different kinds of folks? And I think that really ties back to the work, or maybe the underlying conversation around inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility as well. We're talking about future workplaces and how to build better workplaces for people, how to shape this future of work. A lot of what comes out of those conversations really goes back to IDEA. But I don't know if that's what people realize while they're having those conversations, that that's really at the core of everything we do.
Yes. And when I was, ahead of this chat, I was listening to some conversation you've had over the past kind of 2 and 3 years. And I was curious about where IDEA is now, I guess we'll come on to that, because I was curious, how did operators feel kind of inspired by or any bit kind of overwhelmed by the conversations? Like, what does the practicalities of that mean? Because people got back on a plane or a train and headed away from the event again. Did they get to kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what that might mean for their own spaces or what kinds of things they can do to get started?
Yeah, I think that's actually why the IDEA project was formally created. It's not that we're just started having these conversations in the last 10 years. The European Co-working Assembly, London Co-working Assembly, Co-working Europe, folks from Co-working Canada for decades now have been having these conversations, but generally in the halls of the conferences or in a breakout session in an unconference. And what the Co-working Idea Project was meant to do was to take those conversations international, understanding that we're all at different points in our journeys of learning, unlearning. We use different language in different regions. We're facing different challenges in different regions. But it is a way for folks who may not have an HR department, who may not have an executive team, maybe it's just them running the space, to have other folks to work through these ideas with. And it might be a challenge that some spaces face, but it also, a lot of the challenges are universal. How do we create spaces that help people feel like they belong? Like, what is really an inclusive space? Or how do we design for accessibility? And is that design necessarily for disabled folks? Or is that really making a more inclusive space for everyone? And I think these are the kinds of conversations and questions we have through the IDEA project. And that is intended to carry that learning on beyond the conference, as well as the alliances that we form. So the conversation that we have once a year at the Unconference is just the public version of the conversation we're having in the alliances month after month around the world. And we're sharing this out with the rest of the world. And we also come together with the Co-working Alliance Summit to share what each of our regions are working on so that we can accelerate our own work within our alliances and countries and regions. So I think all of those models, the Unconference, the Summit, the IDEA Project, it's all really designed to keep that learning going for folks at every stage throughout the year. We don't want people to leave and then not put these ideas and learnings into practice.
Yeah, it's such a powerful framework that you've already put into place. How are you seeing it? Are things kind of accelerating at any point in terms of progress? Are people, as the world becomes a little bit more connected and people are waking up to the use of co-working spaces, maybe some people who weren't aware that the spaces in their neighborhood and communities existed, are you seeing more people kind of come on board? Because I feel like the co-working community is expanding in terms of the number of people who are aware of it.
Yeah, I think that's always been a challenge. I mean, for more than 20 years now, we've been trying to educate people about co-working and the benefits of co-working, but I think the language we're using is evolving. I think more and more mainstream folks are starting to catch on to the infrastructure that we're creating as a movement, this global network of infrastructure. I've been writing about this for almost 15 years now, about like what we're doing is not just creating one space in one community. This interconnected network is something really powerful, and we should be recognized, I think, by our local governments, by academic institutions, by some of the corporate partners. And I don't think co-working gets the recognition it deserves really for carrying folks through the pandemic, by modeling an alternative, by showing it can be done, this working from home, working hybrid, working remotely. Without the infrastructure we created, that shift wouldn't have been possible as quickly as well. So I'm taking a really roundabout way to answer your questions, but
No,
I think
this is
all of these
perfect because now I have
themes
another question.
yeah, please.
I'm curious if you've heard of Connected Hubs in Ireland,
Yeah.
the government initiative.
Yes.
No, you're like that. You're ticking a lot of our boxes. You're speaking our language effectively. The things we're seeing here with Connected Hubs. I think we're all at like 397 spaces as of last count today. And like that. I love the way we talk about co-working spaces. There's so much colour to the term co-working space. Like we have everything here in Ireland, from social enterprises, not-for-profits, municipalities, county councils, all the way up to the well-known chains and publicly listed companies, and they all serve different communities in different ways. And what I'm excited to see is exactly that, how the lines of workspaces are now beginning to blur. Myself and Anne-Marie have had a number of conversations in the last few weeks with people that are putting childcare beside the co-working space, or making the downstairs, instead of a cafe, it's now a creche. So you and your kids go to work together. And, God love them, they fall over, they have an accident, or they get sick. You're just upstairs, you can just knock down and make sure they're all right, or else you can all go home early. But it's, as I said, it's the blurring of the lines now. I think a recent example we see here in Ireland, again, it all revolves around community, is a part in Kerry, which would be the next peninsula up again from where myself or the next county up from where myself and Anne-Marie are based. And again, rural Ireland, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about rural Canada at some point as well. But there was obviously they were going through a bit of a West of Ireland, unfortunately, has suffered from a brain drain for years, and that's down to things like connectivity and just poor agricultural soil going all the way back to the beginning of time. But this town in Kerry, our village in Kerry, they lost their post office, they lost another piece of core infrastructure, and they were about to lose the one pub in the village. So the whole village put together a GoFundMe page, and the village bought the pub. And now they're all agreed to doing shifts, and there's going to be internet there so people can work. And so again, coming back to that communal aspect of serving the greater good and being in it together. So again, they have a place to work. They now have a place to point, a place to celebrate local victories in the GA and everything else. So no, it's great to hear all of that. I was at an OECD conference, I think probably about 3 years ago, and they had people from Canada and ourselves in Ireland were there, and the Connected Hubs team were speaking about the work they were doing here in Ireland, and they spoke about like how Ireland isn't necessarily a densely populated nation. And then this lady from Canada stood up and spoke about how dispersed the population was there. The numbers were phenomenal, and she was speaking about how her co-working space literally in the middle of nowhere. So I'd love to understand, obviously, you're based in Toronto yourself. I'd love to get an insight into and a bit of a comparative of what's happening in rural Canada. Because again, as you said to Anne-Marie, if you have a co-working space in a city, you can have a collection of them. That's great. But one co-working space in an underserved or underserved area can have an exponential effect on the wider community. So
Yeah.
I'd love to get your insights in rural Canada.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there and everything you've just said. Let me start with rural Canada. So we've seen a lot of growth in rural Canada and co-working in the last 5-10 years, more so than in the urban centers, I think proportionately. And I think that's because a lot of the local economic development offices or local governments, municipalities are starting to understand, like I said, that value of the infrastructure. They are already trying to hold space for small business or entrepreneurship programming, and they're trying to reanimate a downtown core or a main street, trying to support local small business development and operators who may be struggling post-pandemic, keeping local talent. There's so many reasons why it makes sense to support a co-working community, especially in a rural region. And you're absolutely right about the operators not being in close proximity, so they don't often find the kind of support that they need. And we've been working to create a rural co-working alliance, similar to the one in Europe, that supports spaces that don't have other spaces nearby. Because in Toronto, absolutely, when I was operating one of my spaces, within a year of opening, you could walk to 7 other spaces from my space. But that meant we had a healthy and thriving collective of operators who shared best practices, worked together, met online every month. We built a website so people could find us easier together rather than independently competing. But yeah, if you're the only operator in your small town and there's no one within a few-hour drive from you, it's hard to collaborate in that way, and it's hard to educate folks about co-working. And so that's why Coworking Canada actually was created, to support operators that may not be connected in those smaller regional alliances. So through an Indigenous alliance that we're building out, there's a rural co-working alliance, and there've always been provincial alliances. So Toronto has its own alliance in a city of a few million people, but Ontario, the province, also has an alliance which includes those sort of 1 or 2 spaces in their small towns. So I think it's really important that we learn from each other. And there's still a lot of crossover between the challenges that urban and rural operators face. We all have like that guy in our co-working space. We all have an issue with the printer. We all have an issue with mail or whatever it might be. So that's stuff that's still helpful at a national scale. But the regional alliances or chapters are important because rural folks are experiencing something totally different in terms of education and where they might be on their co-working journey locally. Than a city like Toronto, who has had co-working spaces for 21 years. My first space opened 21 years ago, and we're celebrating 20 years of the co-working movement. So Toronto has a long history of co-working compared to some of the rural communities, and we need to acknowledge those differences when we're trying to support the operators in the communities. But also, I think Brandon Houston did a really incredible job from the Collingwood Foundry with his talk at Coworking Canada this year about like beyond the court, like what we actually need to acknowledge about the critical infrastructure that rural co-working spaces provide. And again, we've been having this conversation at Coworking Canada for years, but I think Brandon did an incredible job summarizing the impact that his space and other rural spaces have on folks who are not anywhere near an urban center in Canada, but still benefit from that connection and community building and the ecosystem of support that they receive in a co-working space, in addition to, the basic amenities that we would all expect to be in a top-notch co-working space. But I think that the essential conversation, again, is really around like what a co-working space does, what it provides. And it doesn't matter if we're in the urban center or in a rural community. We know co-working dismantles loneliness. We know that it is helping with this isolation crisis. We know that people who have stronger social connections live longer and are happier. And we know that folks who have the right kind of workspace that's designed for productivity and focus and flow are more productive, and that we can help retain local talent through these spaces with the resources, the programming, and also the facilities that folks require to operate their business in a small town. There are so many reasons why co-working spaces, I think, are still underestimated and undervalued in terms of what they contribute to the local community.
No, I'd agree. We've taken the approach in Ireland, I suppose. Again, and I love to hear that, you didn't view yourselves as competitors in Toronto at that time, because everybody likes to be the first one with the first idea, and everyone's imitation is the greatest form of flattery, as they say. So it's very easy to get competitive about your own space and close-minded about that. So I think we're seeing this similar here in Ireland, and the Connected Hubs team have done a fantastic job in creating that community of operators. We're like that. We're starting to see them to kind of, as a group, they're now activating purchasing power when it comes to things like buying EV chargers, and that time when phone booths became the big thing around COVID, they were all, where are you getting this? And they were all comparing notes, and they were all able to kind of, how would I say, approved suppliers, and and all of that. So no, that it's great to hear you say that. But I suppose what's the word they use for it? Is it co-opetition? I heard recently. Is it we just live in a world now where we make words up as we go?
I think so. I've heard that recently, but I think it really does come down to collaboration over competition. It's a mindset, and it can't be faked. We know it's very obvious when someone shows up at a collaborative co-working conference or a meeting to scope out the competition. We can tell. Or if someone pretends to be a client and tours your space, they're asking the wrong questions. So it's so much better to just say, hey, I love that you are in the same kind of work as me, and that you care about the members in the way I do. I mean, if you just want to build offices and rent office space, all the power to you. We probably don't have a lot in common. But if you really care about the folks that you're serving with your space, or the community that you're holding space for, I would love to talk. I would love to tell you what's working. I'd love to hear your questions and concerns. I'd love to help you, because I know that a thriving co-working ecosystem is what we need to get to where we need to go. And for me, the co-working ecosystem is almost a means to an end.
You've used the word there, offices, all right? And we're starting to see here more demand for offices, and we're starting to see, I suppose, conversations certainly being had about reducing the open floor plan now, and include offices to cater for, I suppose, smaller, or not small businesses, but businesses that want to tap into the whole flex piece, reduce the fixed overheads, and take advantage of flexible contracts and stuff. And again, there's two things around that. Is we now have a different client type coming into co-working. I can imagine you could attest to that, being in the industry so long. More traditional, I suppose employers from that would generally have had HQs in downtowns and all that kind of stuff. I suppose what's your own thoughts on offices firstly, and how to balance offices, this new shift in client type, and maintaining the ecosystem that you spoke of there as well?
Yeah, so in terms of like office or the physical design of the space, I don't think makes a space a co-working space or not. I think it's how the community interacts with each other. And I know some organizations who have had offices for more than 15 years and have one of the strongest communities in all of the co-working ecosystem because they intentionally curate it, animate it, make connections between members, invite people in, create a space that makes people feel welcome. And maybe it's just that shared kitchen. Maybe it's a community lunch that all the members come to once a week. Maybe it's a lunch and learn that people participate in because they genuinely want to know what other people in the space are working on or learn from each other. Um, it doesn't have to look a certain way to be co-working. I think co-working is what we do when we work together. Co-working is a verb, and it's an action and a model and the movement. So I see that it's really essential in the collaborative activities or the vibe or the community intention that we set. That's where the co-working comes from, not the space. Because we can also look at artists, we can look at other kinds of physical collaboratives. There's a hacker space and a maker space. They look very different, but they're absolutely co-working if you look at the definition of what a genuine co-working community is about. I also think that people need to be aware of the new type of clients as well. There are some fears that we need to still get over with newer co-working folks, and that's true of every new member. So let's not single new corporate teams out as the only new kind of member. A new member who's an entrepreneur will come in clutching their computer and ask if it's safe to leave it on the table. Of course it is. That's the kind of community we've built. We look out for each other, but they don't know that on day one. And a corporate team doesn't necessarily know how to be a part of a co-working community on day one. So we need to give them a bit of grace. And we also need to model the kind of interactions we want them to have with the rest of the community. And then I also think we need to be aware of how much of the space or proportion of the space they occupy. So maybe it's splitting teams up over multiple floors or putting them in different pods instead of all clustered together. Because we know as operators now for this amount of time, there's a critical tipping point in every space where one company could easily start to dominate the culture in the space. And that's all we're worried about with corporate clients, is that we're not tipping the scale from everyone feeling like they're working in their office to them working in a collaboratively owned collective co-working community.
I agree. I've shared this with Anne-Marie. I've lived the other side of that as a two-man team, and a growing Silicon Valley team taking over. A Silicon Valley company based in a co-working space. All of a sudden, before you know it, they're taking the back row of the co-working space. They're having their weekly stand-ups, and we're all here weekend, and we're all trying to get our own work done. And every time you go to get a meeting room, it's blocked out. So I've seen it done. And again, but you can't again. I suppose that was at a time as well where you have the co-working spaces kind of saying, well, this is who we're attracting, how we're attracting it, why we're attracting it, we don't know. Sometimes I think there could be a difficulty in turning away business. None of us want to do that. No, so it's interesting to hear your way of potentially preserving your ecosystem. And again, it's all about fair usage and expectation, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's about setting those expectations early on. When I would give tours of my early co-working spaces, people would come in and say, "Hey, I need a private office," and I'd say, "Okay, yeah, I'll show you the private offices, but maybe let's go check out the event space. Let's check out the meeting room. Let's check out the." And by the end of the tour, they didn't need a private office. They wanted to be out in the open with the other folks. It's because they didn't really know what they needed, and I don't think a lot of the new corporate teams that are coming into co-working space and know exactly what they need. The whole point of being there is to experiment, to try different things out. And so I would set the tone early and let them know that we encourage that experimentation. We're all about it. That's why we exist, just to help them find the right model for their team to be successful. But also that by joining a co-working space, they're joining an active community. You don't just get to be here. You have to participate in some way. And that could just be by being kind to others in the kitchen, by keeping all the common areas tidy as a show of respect for other people working in the space, or considering your volume when you're on a call in the common area, or making sure if you need a meeting room, you're booking it far in advance so it's not a disruption for others who are planning events in the space. And I think people start to see over time that how to act in the space. And so I give all new members a grace period of a couple of months to get settled and understand how things work.
What happens then, Ashley? You have them in for a few months. You've told them where the dishwasher is. Yeah, they still leave the plates in the sink. What are we doing? Are we leaving a passive-aggressive message in the Slack? Are we pulling them aside for a chat? How are we dealing with that person that's just not getting it?
Yeah, I really hate it when there are signs everywhere like, "Do this thing," and I really hate it when it's like it turns into a huge deal. It really is just a conversation, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time folks don't know. They're like, "Oh, I thought someone came in every night and did that." "Oh, totally," and then it's not a problem at all.
Yeah.
So, usually it's just a conversation to point out something that maybe, um, isn't the way we typically handle things, but the framing of that conversation is always, "I just wanted you to know because it could impact other members in the space, and if there's anything that's impacting your enjoyment of the space or experience in the space, I hope you would let me know as well. We'll take care of it." So it's just looking out for each other and always setting the tone of, "How's my behavior impacting
Mhm.
others in the space?" And when we start thinking that way over time, we start thinking about the ways we can collaborate to help others in the space, what we could contribute to the well-being of others in the space, how we might support the space in a greater way, or what else we bring into the space. And so it does take time for those relationships to build. But I notice, and now running spaces for over 20 years, that over time, the kinds of communities that you can build with that intention year after year after year, it's life changing. It's changing the neighborhoods around there. It's generational now. These folks that started co-working with us 21 years ago are getting married and having children, and their children are co-working. It's the first time we've ever seen anything like that. So,
Amazing. Co-working
yeah,
babies.
exactly. That's why I refer to myself as a grandmother in the co-working movement now.
I
We've
love it.
seen
A
a few
co-working
shifts.
elder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It strikes me those teams as well who are like the team you're describing, Graham. I guess particularly in cities as more spaces are opening, and if operators are collaborating, the chances are that there are spaces that would better hold a more mature team. So then they kind of graduate into a space that's more appropriate for them. And even if they go into an office, I'd love to know, it'd be great to measure, but I bet there's an impact on that company culture because they started in a co-working space that would probably be formed a little bit differently if they had just started straight off in a bare bones office by themselves and had to shape their own culture. Like as a business leader and as a team leader, it must be amazing to have this piece in terms of keeping your employees happy and your team happy, that they're in this shared culture space, and that forms this key part of your brand. Even if you're not directly associated with the co-working space, it just naturally evolves because that's where you guys work out of to begin with. Be cool to measure that and see how it impacts teams that started out in co-working spaces, even if they didn't stay there.
Yeah, again though, I've seen, as I said, I've seen teams grow beyond, hit that tipping point, as you mentioned, Ashley, and it become, for the other members, it can affect. I haven't come across a case study yet, and perhaps you might if you have, is let's just say Corporation X has 100 people on a floor in a fancy building in the central business district, right? They've now cut that to 50 people. They're cutting the desks to 50 people, and they're putting the rest of them in co-working spaces around the city or in closer to work from home. They've decided to take own-door offices, and all of a sudden you're transplanting company culture. You're transplanting people that are used to being served in a corporate building where they go in, there's a receptionist that they may not even know their name, they scan in with a badge, they go up in an elevator, there's coffee, they get apples at 11 o'clock, they have the coffee. So they're in I don't want to use the word sterile, but certainly less colourful than, yourself, the dynamicism of a co-working space, a well-run co-working space. Taking those people from what is traditionally, a workplace and putting them into the wonderful ecosystems that you've described. I mean, is there a tendency? Have you seen a tendency for them to take that kind of serve me attitude to co-working spaces? And if so, how have you broken that down, or what would you advise people to do in that instance?
Yeah, and I think it's not intentionally disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just sort of,
Yeah.
how things have been done
Mm-hmm.
traditionally, and to expect that is pretty normal.
Mm-hmm.
But co-working is anything but normal. The whole point of co-working is to disrupt, the typical 9 to 5 office environment in a good way. So there are so many things that we need to maintain, and I think people need to be reassured that this is still a professional office environment, that we prioritize safety and security, and strong Wi-Fi, and it's a safe space, and ergonomic chairs, and all the things that you need to make sure that you're doing due diligence to take care of your employees in a space that you don't fully manage. But beyond that, I think there's a sort of an orientation required for large teams, and it might be one or two short meetings with the group, like a tour of the space. A lot of times, folks will make the mistake of touring the person who makes the decision or signs the lease, and then they don't tour the team members when they arrive. Those are the folks who need to know how the space works, what you do, what you don't do, what's expected of you. And then I think that part of that orientation in every space should really involve that member's code of conduct. And it's not necessarily the legal agreement we sign to become a member in the space. It's the kind of rights and responsibilities we have to each other as members. I have the right to a workspace free from harassment and one that is clean and safe and healthy. I also have a responsibility to contribute to a clean and healthy workplace that's free from harassment. So I think having that conversation and having that as a signed document for every member, often that agreement is co-created by the members themselves and it can be revisited each year as a group. Is this the kind of agreement we want to have in our space? And for those new members to be part of that kind of discussion is something that they never would have been invited to the table before to do. So we're setting a new tone, and we're giving folks examples of how to interact in healthy and good ways. And I think there has to still be that understanding. There's a transition period for all new members, and other members in the space should also be understanding of that, especially if a large group comes in. But I've seen it the opposite, where a large group comes in or they start growing within the space. Maybe they take over a floor. Now, in a lot of my models, I build for that kind of expansion, so you don't need to lose the member. Maybe they move to a private floor, but they're still connected to the events and the community that they've been a part of for so long. Perhaps they move nearby and they're still connected through different lunches and ongoing communications, or maybe they're still part of the virtual or online community, even if they've moved out of the building. But what I've seen is that those groups that have grown, actually, I won't name the name because I don't know if it's a public story, but one of the groups that grew out of one of our downtown buildings opened up their own office. And when they opened up their own office, they realized, oh, now we have to handle the internet and furniture and all the things again. We haven't done this in 5 or 6 years. So they started thinking as a group what they wanted in their space. And they basically built it out like a really cool version of our co-working space, but for their team. And then, like, not even 6 months later, they won a design award for how incredibly innovative their office was. And I thought, hey, wait a minute, where's our award? But also, it really goes to show you how much you influence that culture in a corporate team just by being in the space. They knew how they worked the best. They knew that they were getting more inspiration by meeting in these ways. So it's nice to see that evolve.
Yeah, I think that one of the points there was blatantly obvious. I think you're like generally, as you said, there's that the billing point. The decision maker turns up and gets the tour, and then they're all told, right, everybody report to work on Monday in this place, and like that. There, yeah, I think you're dead right. There needs to be a whole team-wide onboarding, and so it's easy to get buy-in that way, right? Everybody knows the rules of the role from the beginning. Then, so that's a very simple but powerful point, I suppose.
Yeah, I think welcoming them to the space too. I mean, we used to welcome organizations, say, welcome to this team, like on the board at the front on Monday. But what about welcome John and welcome Sue and welcome, those are the members of the space. So maybe that's who we should be welcoming.
Sure.
Absolutely. What do you think, Ashley, in terms of the commercial real estate aspect, the office letting space, how businesses are kind of downsizing and taking offices since the schmanschmemic? How do you think it's going to influence the industry? And, we're kind of dancing around the idea of people coming out of corporate and more traditional office setups and entering co-working spaces, and they're maybe the less typical profile. But it's just a very natural way that it's evolving, and it's unlikely to go backwards, shall we say. And I think there's a lot of richness that can come in through kind of the 9-to-5ers and employees versus, the entrepreneurs and the self-starters. Maybe, you can be a self-starter in a 9-to-5 for sure also, by the way. But how do you see it all evolving?
On that point about the word we're not going to mention, I was chatting to someone briefly and they said we're now 5 years post that, and the chap I was chatting said we'd expected things to kind of figure themselves out by now, but he said it's still a very rapidly evolving conversation, and we all thought return to office was going to out the window, but that's coming back as a big conversation as well. So just to kind of add that on top of Anne-Marie's questions, what are your thoughts around all that, Ashley?
Yeah, I think the new work landscape is shifting in such a way that we've never seen before, and I think it's not stopping. We're not anywhere near the kind of work landscape we're going to have 5 years from now. And I think AI is obviously a big part of that, but every single organization worldwide is reevaluating their entire workforce right now, how they do things, how they automate things, what kind of technology they're using, and which elements are most essential to remain human elements over the next few years. And so I think co-working will play a massive role in supporting whatever kind of a workforce we end up with. But I'm much more concerned right now about universal basic incomes and thinking about ways to support workers when more than 30% of the workforce is supposed to be laid off within the next few years. So how are we even changing or preparing to adapt to accommodate the ways people will be working 5 years from now? We haven't even started to think about that. So I think we're in a massive state of transition. I think that's exactly what co-working was designed for. We've survived 3 global economic recessions now since the co-working movement began, and co-working is thriving more and more each time, even though for a period we were not allowed to co. Now, co-working is still thriving, and I think the point is that it is flexible and can evolve to meet the needs for the future workforce. The whole reason this movement was born was not an alternative to a traditional office in the sense of we're looking for a flexible office situation. It was an alternative to traditional work. A lot of the folks who were in co-working in the early days didn't fit into a 9 to 5, didn't fit into an office job, didn't fit into traditional workplaces. Um, and that's why they were in co-working in the first place. And I think that that's the kind of sort of groundbreaking or trailblazing work that co-working needs to do in the future as well. And we're primed to do that. I think it's important we keep our minds open as the landscape shifts. But again, it's never about the space, it's about what we're doing within them.
And does it need to be then, like, would you see I suppose if you take it that people naturally, our mindsets oftentimes are who we are, and how we work, has a strong influence on who we are. So like, is there an element of people going into more traditional core co-working spaces because they need a place to work versus being motivated by the co-working as an approach? Like, should we have different space setups where one group just needs somewhere to work versus another person wants to be part of a co-working community? Or is there benefit in those mindsets mixing?
Yeah, I think we already have that. I think there are a lot of office buildings for people to work. There's executive centers and business suites, and there's all kinds of reasons why you might want to use that kind of setup to appear more professional or to have a business address that matters in your industry. But a lot of the folks that we are trying to attract are folks who want to be part of a larger community and who understand that there's a real benefit to the health and well-being of their workers and in turn their organizations, and also a huge benefit in terms of productivity and innovation and being able to upskill and learn new skills around using AI effectively in their organization. So um, I think we'll continue to see spaces for everyone. An artist space is not designed for real estate professionals, and a tech space is not designed for makers, and it shouldn't be. But there is I wouldn't say that I believe in completely separating that, because I found the most success in some of my co-working models by mixing groups that traditionally wouldn't be in the same building. Like when I moved all my artists into the Foundry buildings, which was full of tech entrepreneurs and makerspace, the artists became more entrepreneurial and the entrepreneurs became way more creative. And that
Love
was
it.
really the beauty of
Love
having
it.
all those folks together.
Yeah, bringing a little bit of commercial modeling into people who realize it's okay to promote their own work. And likewise, giving the tech bros a break from, they probably come up with all the more ideas on their morning runs then, because they're, you just pick it up from people, don't you? I think as well, I'm seeing like an education piece with people who, we exist in the world of co-working, so we're so familiar with it, but I still tell people what I do for work and they're like, it's sold it to where? Software for where? Co-working isn't actually on everybody's radar. And if because your office shut down, you've ended up in a co-working space, probably you're on a bit of a journey. You might realize, oh wow, there's loads of different types of spaces. Like I am in, an office where I key in and key out, but I've heard actually there's a great community down the road that's kind of like what I'm doing, but and they'll get to learn the depth of what community can be and what co-working can be, and maybe people will start hopping around between spaces a bit more than if they are new to it. and find a community that works for them, because I think you can have both. Like, it's not like people who are in a 9 to 5 or an employee mindset don't crave depth in the same way, that any of us do. I
Yeah,
think
I
there's a
think
great
too.
opportunity with it.
Yeah, and I think the new platforms and aggregators and the networks of spaces are empowering those corporate folks to be able to access more spaces. So I used to work with DeskPass for a while, and part of their strategy was to onboard new corporate teams and really show them the value and the beauty of having access to this, nationwide network or global network of opportunity. So the idea that perhaps your organization would pay for you to be able to touch down in any co-working space in the world to get your work done if you need it, or to rent a meeting room if you had a really important hiring or interviews to do. Um, that's something that we've never seen before. And that really provides even employees who might not be self-employed that autonomy, that flexibility, that choice, deciding where and when they work best, how they work best. A lot of folks move around space to space. They don't have a membership in one space full time because they need different things on different days, or maybe they work for multiple clients in different ways. And I
And
think that's showing folks like how we can work.
apps, and just empowering people to wake up in the morning and have to take a decision about where you spend the day. Typically, we kind of associate, and I did 9 to 5 for 10 years, like typically we associate that with like, you don't take decisions, you just kind of go where you're assigned to be. But when you can become more empowered in the work that you're doing in the day to day and choose where you're going to be, no matter what level of the organization you're at, that does lead to more productivity for the business as well. And if I sit close to an artist, even if my 9 to 5 is something in the corporate world, but I always wanted to get back into some music that I did when I was a kid, or I wanted to draw again, and I start doing that at my weekends, like my life is becoming more well-rounded. You're breaking out of that shell a little bit, all be off the back of where you work, even if you still stay in your day-to-day. Because like there's been such a bit of a push towards like hustle culture and let's all be entrepreneurs and stuff, and actually a 9 to 5 role suits people really well, and it's a beautiful way, I think, for co-working can kind of help people to stay in the lane that's suiting them well, but still enrich their lives.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where we do the poorest job of communicating the value of co-working. Or maybe it's because that's not what people recognize their issue to be. Again, they come in looking for a private office, but really what they need is to be around other people to get new ideas and inspiration, or to think about how to do something differently, or to be invited to an event to learn something that they didn't know they were missing out on, a skill or a
Yeah.
new kind of technology. So um, yeah, a lot of times folks don't know what they need, but after, we always see this when there's a shift to work from home. It could be in an organization, it could be in a certain town or region, or now globally with what we just all went through. But it takes people time to recognize, hey, maybe I don't have as many friends now as I did before. Maybe I didn't have any spontaneous connections today. I didn't learn anything new. Maybe I didn't actually get out of my chair and go for a 20-minute walk in the morning and in the evening like I normally do. And to notice that there's a negative impact, it takes some time. Or the
Yeah.
only person I talked to today was the dog. These things start to be like a problem a few years after you start. Most people don't notice that right away. Now we're seeing this sort of return to the space in the same way that I think a lot of folks are trying to get people to return to the office, and they're just slightly off. They understand that that connection is valuable and the interactions we have in that space is valuable, but they're missing the choice piece
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
like sort of how and where and when.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's bazillions of studies now being done on flexible work, and you'll always find, I said this to Anne Marie, you'll always find a statistic to suit your own agenda. But the one thing that keeps coming back is there's a really small fragment want to work exclusively from the office. There's a bigger segment want to work, at home, and then there's just this massive chunk in the middle where people just want the choice. And it's all, and it's just the opportunity and the choice. I've been that guy who literally, has been in the slippers for the week and gone, I've actually engaged with a human this week. And I've often said, the term remote work seemed like, it was associated with all these great and wonderful things. But as I've often said to Anne-Marie, like, remote has actually a lot of negative connotations to it. You're stuck on a remote desert island, doesn't really sound too appealing. You're out there on your own. And again, I think mental well-being, mental health, and all these kind of things as well. They creep up on you as you said, as you've kind of pointed out there, Ashley, and you do need that human connection, and I think it's vital that you have that choice, that flexibility to get out there and get into one of these spaces. One of the other things I've been kind of saying to Anne-Marie is like how, not so long ago it was just accepted practice that you would go to college, let's just say, do your best and get a job with a well-known household brand or whatever it may be, and it was expected that you would pack up your life, put it into boxes, move across the country, move to another country, try get a house or housing close to transport that would get you to this building that had said logo above the door. And to think that people are still doing that, I'm sure, but to think now that that's not an expectation anymore, and it for me, the massive impact that can have on, where we're based in rural Ireland, it was generally people that worked in agricultural industries and everything else, and that had the luxury of living in these wonderful places. Now here we are, we're in tech, and there's nothing stopping us from having families. Those guys never actually leaving, being educated because the way third level is going, and building out that family element and reinvigorating all these wonderful places around the world. And so like it's kind of like, you could get to a stage where someone could say, my family, we're in tech and we live in the absolute back end of nowhere. I've stopped myself from swearing, Anne-Marie. Just you see that? I was going to use a word.
Very well, Graham.
Thanks.
Well done.
Spotify
Lasted
wouldn't have
almost an hour. Unless you've been muting yourself and swearing while we can't hear you. Ashley, I'm keeping an eye on time, guys. Can I ask, like, I could ask you a million more questions, but what I'd love to know is what's next for IDEA?
So the IDEA project will continue. I don't know if we're going to keep monthly challenges going just because of the kind of time required. And also we've received feedback from the folks who take the challenges that they want more time to process. So maybe it takes them the month to learn about the topic. Maybe then they have a conversation with their community, and then the next few weeks they're putting a solution together in practice. So I like the idea of more time in between challenges, but we'll continue to issue them, and in a general and broad way that allows people from all different regions to participate at their own pace, and in their own ways. And I think really the intention of IDEA is just to spark conversations. It's like planting seeds. Okay, can we take this concept back to our community and discuss how it might impact our members, how we might create a space that considers them more deeply? And that's really what it's meant to do, especially while there are some regions in the world right now, perhaps south of Canada, who aren't allowed to use this language in grant applications or in their day-to-day roles for fear of losing their jobs. So it really highlights how essential this work is, and we're allowing people to do it in their own way in the background for now.
It's incredible. What do you feel most, I suppose, concerned about, or what do you feel might be a challenge to be addressed over the coming years, and where is the opportunity in terms of both sides of the spectrum for where you see things heading?
I think again, the term co-working is losing a bit of its power, in the same way that it did when a large organization started calling themselves that and tanking the image in the industry. Same as when the industry gets more attention than the movement did in its early days. There are a lot of threats, I think, to the co-working movement, but I think that the way we consider work is changing, and in the sense that we could say everyone will be co-working soon. I think the model is becoming so much more prevalent that the uniqueness maybe disappeared, but that's when we'll really see a resurgence of those community-focused, independent, supported co-working spaces, and we'll call that co-working again. So I kind of see that happening at the same time as I see a massive overhaul of everything we call work. So this is a very exciting but disconcerting time to be at the front of leading the future of work and the new work landscape. But I think if we continue to focus on the worker and building resilient workers and resilient communities, then no matter what it looks like, we're going to be okay. Because really, it's the humans at the center of all this that we're looking to support from the very beginning. And that's what's important.
Absolutely. People feeling empowered and tuned in and kind of acting with intention. Yeah, in line with what it is they want to be doing. Love that.
Is there anywhere, Ashley, that people can find you? Any action you'd like people to take or be aware of? Do you like
You can find me at creativeblueprint.ca or coworkingcanada.com, and all of our upcoming events and idea project challenges will be issued through there as well.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thanks,
Ashley.
for the combo. I really enjoyed that. That was great crack.
Thanks for tuning in to Flex That Worx. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss our next episode. Connect with us on LinkedIn, watch the full episode on YouTube, and you can explore free tools and resources over at baseworks.co. This is Flex That Worx, powered by Baseworks, here to help you scale your workspace, making it simpler and less stressful.